WATD presents John Paul, the Car Doctor. All things automotive. Have questions? Call 781-837-4900. Now, here's John Paul, the Car Doctor.
And good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Car Doctor program on 95.9 WATD. And it is Sunday morning, and like Jesse pointed out, the weather is wacky. It is just, we have a variety of weird things going on. It's sunny, it's rainy, it's snowing, it's sleet. It's doing all kinds of crazy things. So, you still need to make sure you maintain your car and do everything you need to do to make sure it is running the way it should, and it's going to take care of you when you need to. And we're not at the point of self-driving cars yet. We just did a study at AAA that showed that self-driving cars, a higher percentage than we had seen in the past of people don't want to be in self-driving cars. They're afraid of being in self-driving cars. I think it's up to about 68% of the people. And some of that's probably somewhat due to, all the news you hear from, some of the Teslas crashing and other vehicles, because self-driving technology really isn't there yet. And the other little bit of news that we put out this week had to do with some vehicle thefts we saw with key fobs, where people would keep key fobs either in their car, which is kind of silly, or they would keep them very close to the door of their house, so the key fob would still work, even though it wasn't that close to the car. And in some cases it would work because thieves would actually have these boosters that would boost the signal from the car to the key, so the car thought the key was really closer than it was. You can get in and you can start the car. In a lot of cases the cars weren't stolen, but what they were was people were ransacking the cars, going through them and looking for a variety of different things, whatever valuables you keep in your own car. So always best to lock your car. And of course the other news that sort of followed up with that was the whole Kia Hyundai thing, where a lot of Kias were getting stolen, and they're getting stolen. And one story I just read said the cars were being hot wired with a USB cable. That's not even close to being true. It had nothing to do with the USB cable hot wiring the car. It had to do with they were using the plug to actually manipulate the lock. So you could be a screwdriver for that matter. Let's see, is Jesse back?
I am here.
Okay. Jesse had to make an emergency run down the hall and not what you think, by the way, but he had to make an emergency run down the hall to check on things. So everything's good down the hall?
I actually never left. You did? I wanted to be here with you and
you did.
Experience the beginning of the show, but I will go check.
How touching! How touching!
Well, I thought about how you might want to bring your guest on right away, so I was like, I better not leave.
Well, with us then is David Setterland. He is a history researcher and author, and he specializes in automotive history. David, good morning, and welcome to the Car Doctor program.
Good morning, John.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the things that you do, and how did you get into this?
Well, I love old cars, and I started researching and writing from 1891 forward. And there was a book written by Beverly Ray Kimes and Henry Austin Clark Jr. called The American Cars Standard Catalog, 1805 to 1942. And it just excites you when you read that, because I was hoping that I could actually let you read it someday. It's like an encyclopedia, and it gives brief history, but some of the cars are so interesting, you have to research further. And there is no book written on all the automobiles except for the standard catalog, but it's very brief. And I decided 18 years ago, I drive back and forth to the airport for Drummond Transportation out of Duxbury, which is now TK Livery out of Weymouth, and I had a lot of sitting time, so I would bring books and I would read. And I decided to write a book with 90 chapters, 3 volumes, a complete history of the American automobile from 1891 to 1948, and then with the Tucker automobile from Chicago. That the big three got together and they basically paid the judge off to find him guilty of mail fraud and put him out of business. Most people know the Tucker car because they made a movie out of it. But going back, the history of the automobile is fantastic. And what I've done since is I'm researching the complete industrial revolution starting in 1793 at the Samuel Slater Mill in Pawtucket, which is right near you, I guess.
Yep.
And then up to Lowell, to Francis Cabot Lowell, Boston Manufacturing in Waltham, and then the city of Lowell. And Thomas Blanchard built the very first steam car in America, and he also invented the lathe. And Eli Whitney, that built the cotton gin, that wasn't his greatest invention. The greatest invention he designed and invented was the milling machine. And between the milling machine and the lathe, they went to the Springfield Arsenal, and it made the rifles for the military.
Yeah, no.
And the most important thing about that is that's where interchangeable parts came from. Before, whenever machines were made, each machine was made individually. So, and it all evolves right into the auto industry.
Well, let's talk about the auto industry a little bit. You mentioned the first steam car. Yeah. Now, and there are some people who think the absolutely first car ever made was a steam car, and that was made in Roxbury. I think it was made by Roper, right?
There's an argument on that, but Thomas Blanchard is credited with the first steam car.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yes.
And the first kind of car as we know it, kind of a
internal combustion engine powered.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And who built that one?
It was actually Siegfried Marcus from Vienna, Austria. He built it in the Benz and Daimler cars were built in 1887. But Siegfried Marcus built his, and it was all wood, very little metal in it, with a internal combustion engine, 1869, I believe it was. But he also built a car before that in 1859 that was run on steam. So the Nazis, under Hitler, gave the orders for the German soldiers when they went into Austria to go to the technical museum that had the Siegfried Marcus car and destroy it. And the word got out that the German soldiers were going to destroy that because Siegfried Marcus was Jewish. And Hitler didn't want any Jews to have credit for inventing the first car. He wanted Karl Benz to. Now, Karl Benz spelt his name with a C, but that's not German. So Hitler even made him change his name to Karl with a K. But what happened is the museum in Austria found out that the German soldiers were on their way, so they took it down into the basement and they built a cement block wall around it and they hid it. Now, it lasted for quite a while. The men that built it were no longer with the museum by the end of the war. And it was in the 1990s that somebody went down and says, I think there's something behind that wall. And they didn't know if there was anything or not, so they broke down the wall and they found the Siegfried Marcus car. Now it's on display at the Technical Museum in Austria. Yeah.
And back in the early part of the last century, there was a lot of car makers that were almost kind of one-offs. You could build a frame and build a body, and you were suddenly a car manufacturer, right?
You're absolutely right. A lot of people don't realize there was more automobile bodies built in Amesbury, Massachusetts, up to 2015 than any other place on Earth. And they had 37 different carriage builders there and 2 sleigh makers, all horse-drawn. And once the automobiles started being built, they switched their trades to building automobile bodies, and they'd ship them on train. And Billy Durant, that originally came from Boston, that took over Buick and then built GM, he used to buy bodies for Buick, and he had them shipped by rail. And in 1915, he had a special Buick model called the Amesbury model to pay tribute to the fine workmanship that the body builders in Amesbury did.
Yeah, and that area up there was sort of known for kind of a little bit of. I think there was a company up there that provide a lot of interior materials, something Bonnie. That did up in that area, and you would think Amesbury, of all places, you wouldn't think that. I guess as almost the same idea as the idea of Rolls-Royce building bodies in Springfield, right?
I don't think they actually built the bodies here, but they did assemble the cars.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, and they had Brewster down in Long Island City, New York, actually do the bodies for them. Yeah.
So just when you think it is in fact something that they must all be made in England or something. In fact, that's not the case at all.
Well, what happened is they were making them, and they were only allowed to sell them in America. They were not allowed to sell them anyplace else. And the Springfield Rolls-Royce sold a couple down to Argentina, and the Argentina dignitaries, when they had problems with it, they notified England that the cars that they bought from Rolls-Royce, they had a problem, and Rolls-Royce over in England did not like that. It leaked out, and they took the franchise away, so they couldn't build them no more.
And and I'm kind of bouncing around here, and I apologize for that. But I just got an email from somebody who says that they're in the early stages of establishing an event to honor the legacy of GM's Framingham automotive production. They want to chronicle kind of the Metro West birth and growth of the automotive industry, and they're hoping to get a 1924 Bay State sedan completed in the next year or so it'll be drivable for 2024 for its 100th birthday. I didn't even know there was a Bay State sedan.
I haven't heard that one either, but I do have 3 books on the complete history of Chevrolet Company. Louis Chevrolet started it in 1913 with Billy Durant, and Billy Durant wanted Chevrolet they built a big, beautiful car in 1913, but they weren't selling. And he also had Mr. Little, that was one of his friends, build a car called the Little Car. And he combined those 2 cars together. Louis Chevrolet didn't want his Chevrolet name on a little car, on a smaller car, and he quit, and he walked away. And I can actually send you that complete history on that. I've written a chapter on Billy Durant, and Louis Chevrolet.
Yeah.
And that's the car that brought Billy Durant back into General Motors and made him the top boss again until he got thrown out again 5 or 6 years later.
Well, that's an interesting point. You talk about how people came in and out of the automotive industry, and a lot of the early automotive industry eventually all went bankrupt, right?
Well, 2000. I always say 2000. I mean 1908 had problems. After World War I ended in 1919, they had a recession in 1920 and 1921 that put a lot of companies out of business. And then 1929, the Black Friday, most of the big, beautiful cars that were being built just didn't last. The Marmon, the Duesenberg, the Cord, the McFarlane. Packard was lucky to have carried through, and the Depression really did a number.
Yeah, it really did, and I know what little I know about early automotive history. You look at a lot of these car brands, and as they merged together with other companies, they had to, because they just, for one reason or another, weren't profitable. They weren't able to put it all together to make it work, because building a car is a very complex. Even in the simple days, was a very complex procedure that required a lot of resources, and a lot of these early manufacturers just didn't have the resources to be able to do it, right?
You're absolutely right, but many of the smaller ones bought the parts, so they really weren't like Ford Motor Company. In fact, a lot of people think that Henry Ford built the very first car. His first successful car was in 1903, and the Dodge brothers, Horace and John Dodge, actually built it for the Ford Motor Company. Mm-hmm. But he started in 1899 with 2 investors, and he built a race car. And they thought that he should have been building cars so they could get a return on their money, so they cut the financing. And he ended up by 1901, he ended up building that race car, and he beat Alexander Winton, which was the fastest race car driver in America at the time. So they got 47 other investors together, and they started the Detroit Automobile Company, which was actually the Ford Motor Company. And what Henry Ford did is he knew that if he took and started building cars without getting the patents first, that there was people that would take and strip it, reverse engineer down the last nut and bolt, and run to the patent office, get patents, and then Ford Motor Company would be paying all those royalties to somebody else when he invented it. So Ford was really kind of brilliant in the beginning. And he ended up walking out of the Detroit Motor Car Company, and they had to change the name from Ford. And he built this very first car, and that car turned out to be the Cadillac, the 1902 Cadillac. And they hired Henry Leland from your neck of the woods. He worked for Brown and Sharp, moved to Detroit, Michigan, started a machine shop called Falcona Leland, and he was hired by Oldsmobile, ran some Olds to build engines and transmissions. And when the investors at the Detroit company that was building the Fords, when he wasn't building the cars, they're going to hire Henry Leland to come in and run the warehouse to get them built, and Ford wouldn't hear of it, and so he walked out. So they eventually hired Henry Leland to run Cadillac, and that very first Cadillac was built by Ford. And if you look at the 1903 Ford and the 1902 Cadillac, they look exactly the same. That's because the same man designed them both.
Well, I'll tell you a couple little things that I got to do in my life so far. Is I got to drive a reproduction of the very first Daimler car, that little three-wheel car that you see as one of the first vehicles. And I also got to drive a reproduction of that Ford race car, which...
You're a lucky man.
yeah, which was probably one of the most fun and scary things I ever did in my life. And I think I only got it up to about 40 miles an hour or so. And I can't imagine what it was like with a driver and a throttle man. It was sort of like... It was sort of like how offshore race boats run, with somebody steers and somebody runs the throttle, and I guess that's how the race car ran at the same time, which was kind of fascinating in its own weird way. But yeah, we've seen a lot, and I don't know, was it Henry Ford that when somebody asked him, what people were looking for in early cars, who said, people were just looking for basically faster horses?
He grew up on a farm, and he hated milking cows.
Yeah.
And he didn't really like taking care of horses, so he wanted to replace the horse. And then he says, yes, now it's time to take and replace the cows. And he started soybean production and getting the milk from soybean. He used to supply the Ford company with soy milk for all the workers to drink free of charge. And no, he was a character. But
yeah.
But when Ford raced against Winton, he had a mechanic riding with him.
Right.
And it was on an oval track. And if you watch the History Channel, it showed that they raced through the countryside. They did not race through the countryside. They raced on an oval track.
Right.
And a lot of the tracks back then were wood planks. And that mechanic, the two things that he had to do, number one was pour oil in because it was gravity fed. They didn't have oil pumps in the first cars. And the second thing he had to do was when they were driving around the corner, he had to get out on that running board and hang as low to the ground as he could so the car could go faster around the corner and it wouldn't tip over.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of that, and it was pretty amazing to see. And you chronicled cars. You said how late do you go?
1948, but I'm actually, where I was coming on the show, I did a quick crash course on Toyota and Honda, and I was very surprised with what I found out on just the research this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of interesting that, a lot of the early Toyota dealers and early Honda dealers were basically gas station owners, because the people that sold Buicks and Pontiacs and Fords didn't want anything to do with them, and people that had a pretty successful gas station started getting a little franchise with the Toyotas and Hondas, and some of those cars were weirdly interesting in their own way. In fact, one of the weirdly interesting things, you sent me an article today about what could be considered in some cases the first minivan, although it's not so mini, which was the Stout Scarab, which was one of those early aerodynamic sort of cars. And I think what was it in Haggerty's publication called it the coolest minivan ever. But
I agree.
Yeah.
If you want to see one, the best place to go is to Hickory Corners in Michigan. They have the museum there, and they have one in the barn. It's a fabulous museum. While you're out there, you can go through Auburn, Indiana, to the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum. Then you can go a little bit further north through Dearborn to the Henry Ford Museum. Lansing has the Olds Museum. South Bend has a Studebaker Museum. It's unbelievable, the museums in America. And there's a guy named Sean Matthews from Georgia that actually prints emails, and he sends them out every week highlighting different museums across America. So I would encourage people to support these museums, because if they don't get the support, they end up going out of business, and when they auction them off, many of them go out of the country overseas.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, and you don't even have to go to Detroit. I mean, right here in New England, we have some pretty neat places. We have the Lars Anderson Auto Museum in Brookline. We have the Audrain Museum, which I've never been to, down in Newport. We have the Newport Car Museum, which is typically newer cars, but still, if you love absolutely pristine, beautiful cars, the Newport Car Museum is certainly worth going to. The Round Shaker Barn down at the Heritage Museum has some beautiful cars down there, and Owl's Head is interesting. I kind of miss friend of mine, Glenn Gould. His father owned the museum up in Wells, Maine, the Wells Auto Museum, and since then that's been sort of, I don't think it's open anymore. I know they sold some of the cars that were in there after Glenn Sr. passed away, and there was some family issue that went on with all of that too. But there is some, and even down in I think it's down in maybe Pawtucket or somewhere, there's a little auto racing museum. There's a lot of little fascinating pieces of automotive history you can find kind of all around New England. The Stanley Steamer Museum up in Maine,
Kingfield, Maine.
Yeah. There's a lot of places. If you like to look at history as well as read about it, there's a lot of places you can really look at some of this history.
Yes, you're right. There's one museum that I did want to point out that I have backed for at least 10, 12 years now. It's called Seal Cove Museum. It's up on the island that Bar Harbor's on, but it's on the south side. And it's a complete educational type museum with some of the earliest brass age vehicles. It was one of the first articles that I wrote that I took pictures. And the museum said that you can take many pictures as you want, but you can't use them, for commercial use. And I wrote the article for the veterans, the Vintage Motor Car Club of America. They print a magazine every 2 months called The Bulbhorn. And I submitted it, and they printed it. And a week later, I got an email. Once it was published, I got an email from the Seal Cove Museum. And I said to my wife, maybe I shouldn't open it because I broke the law. They might be pushing it because I took pictures and publicized it, even though I'm not getting paid for any of this. No, they loved the article. They said that it was one of the highlights of their marketing was to have that printed. And since then, I have done over 150 different articles printed in different magazines and electronic mailings touring car magazines. And it educates the public. But it's a dying sport, the old cars. If you go to the auctions, the auctioneers don't even want to waste time auctioning like a Model T or a Model A Ford. There's not enough money in a farm. They would rather do a Mercedes or a Porsche or something like that, and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars commission. So we're moving out of the antique auto stage into the ultra-modern. And the kids growing up today, generation after generation, if they're not introduced to the old cars, they're going to be gone.
Yeah, I mean, that was always the person who used to own Hemmings Motor News, Terry Eric. He always felt that, you should always try to bring your kids to a car show sort of thing, because he really did feel that it was important that people get to, really look at and see what there really is to see about some of these cars that were part of history. I know I just stumbled across a car that I had never heard of before from Indianapolis, Indiana. It was called the National. It was built by the National Motor Car and Vehicle Corporation, and I saw it at a local car show, and I'd never seen one before, and it was a pretty fascinating car.
The National was one of the Indy 500 sponsors in the first 1909 150-mile race. They had the Stutz. They had the Marmon. Duesenberg was after 1922. A lot of great cars. In Indianapolis was actually the car capital before Detroit, and before Indianapolis, Cleveland was. So it's pretty interesting. I've actually written a chapter just listing all the car companies in St. Louis. But they weren't big enough to deserve their own chapter. Yeah. But they all deserve to be written about and explained. Now, Harry Stutz, what I write, I want to tell this one little story if I could.
Well, why don't you put that story on hold for just a minute, and why don't we take a break? And we got some bills to pay. So why don't we take a quick break? Why don't you stay on hold? This is a fascinating old car conversation. If you don't mind, we'd like to keep you on for another 10 minutes or so.
You got me all day if you want.
Well, they don't let me stay on all day. So why don't we do that? You're listening to the Car Doctor program on 95.9 WATD. We're talking with David Setterland. He is an old car historian, author, and pretty knowledgeable guy here. When we're talking about everything from old cars from late 1800s to mid-1900s and a lot of the history, and those are all the cars I really don't know a whole lot about. So stay tuned for a little bit more old car talk. You're listening to the Car Doctor program on 95.9 WATD. We'll be right back.
No one wants to be left. With AAA, you won't be. Their experienced technicians will be there fast to help with your dead battery, unexpected breakdown, frozen locks, or any car issue that comes with winter weather. They're trained to fix most problems on the spot, often without the need for a tow. And you're covered in any car you're driving or riding in, 24/7. Join AAA today at aaa.com/join.
Few make it big in motorsports, but the real reward for most is the thrill of the adrenaline and the chance to hold the checkered flag. I'm Miles Heger. The excitement and danger of motor racing are the reasons drivers love to race and why fans show up. Join me and my guests each week as we discuss the local short tracks while also sharing opinions and insight on NASCAR's National Series. Tune in to Miles on Motorsports Tuesday nights at 7 here on 95.9 WATD.
Make an appointment Sunday morning at 11 for John Paul, the Car Doctor, on 95.9 WATD. Now, back to the Car Doctor.
And welcome back to the Car Doctor program. We're talking with David Setterland. He is a automotive historian and researcher, and he's taken us through a lot of really interesting history in some of these old cars that we're seeing around. David, welcome back to the Car Doctor program.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So you started to get us up to date a little bit. Where were you going with that?
Okay, Harry Stutz. This is a type of writing that I research and write that I think a lot of people, especially women, love this. Harry Stutz's father immigrated from what would be possibly Czech Republic, Slovakia area to Ellis Island. And when he was in line waiting, the gentleman or the couple in front turned to Harry's father and says to him, who's sponsoring you? And he said, my uncle out in Indiana. And he says, oh, very good. And the young woman behind Harry's father says, what do you mean sponsor? And they told her that if you don't have a sponsor and you're immigrating into the country, they're going to put you back on the boat and refuse you to come. And she said she had no sponsor. And she was basically the same age as Harry's father. So they solved the problem. The two of them got married in line, and they lived happily ever after, right until death do them apart. But Harry was born, and Harry Stutz was considered one of the greatest engineers of the first decade in the 1900s.
And I guess if my memory serves, there was a beautiful Stutz car down at the down at Heritage Gardens in the Round Barn down there.
Oh yes, yeah. No collection is complete without a Stutz, without a Duesenberg, without a McFarlane. But not too many people have McFarlanes.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't even know if the casino's still there, but there was a casino out in Las Vegas that had the largest private collection of Duesenbergs in the world, I think.
Yes, that was Harrah's collection, and that was busted up when Mr. Harrah died. I probably will do a chapter on him because he contributed a lot to saving antique automobiles. But people that go to Vegas now, they have a museum called the Quad Museum because it's on the 4th floor. And they have a lot of the historic automobiles, movie star cars, like Elizabeth Taylor's, Cadillac and whatnot. And I visited there, and it's fabulous. The cars that they have for sale, and believe it or not, the prices are pretty reasonable.
Yeah, there is some pretty fascinating cars kind of around the country, and I think people are always fascinated with celebrity-owned cars, whether it's I don't know, whether it's somebody who owned a Stutz Blackhawk, which was, I think, kind of a Buick of sorts, one kind or another, or whether it's so that was sort of a modern neoclassic sort of car. But there was a lot of interesting cars that celebrities owned, and I think I've never been to Graceland, but I guess there's a lot of the Graceland Elvis's Cadillac down there that people can look at and see. And I just read recently that one of Elvis's planes sold for like $2.3 million, and it was it had no engines and electronics in it, and it probably doesn't have any chance of ever flying again. But it's amazing the amount of some of these prices go for, some of these kind of pieces of history, and that's what cars are. They're pieces of history. You whether it's the cars that were in the 50s and 60s that had that kind of rocket ship look, or whether it was cars that were in the early 1900s that were glorified wagons.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You got car makers all over this country. Now, you brought it up that young men would take and maybe read Scientific Journal saying how men are building cars, so they would start building the cars in their backyard. I wanted to point out in Boston alone, that's including Charleston, Brighton, Alston, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Roslindale, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, in South Boston and East Boston. It's listed as 178 different men or companies that started building automobiles between 1880 and 1920. And that was mixed with electric, steam, and internal combustion gas. So there are so many different cars out there, from the early years. If you, like Pawtucket, Rhode Island, you had the train maker down there that made engines, and they built automobiles too. Rhode Island had probably as many automobile builders in the first 20 years as Indianapolis, and a lot more than Detroit. The first car built in Detroit was Charles King, 3 months before Henry Ford built his quadricycle. But a lot of people don't realize Detroit was called the Car City. in the 1880s and 1890s. The reason why, because the railroads were expanding all across the country. The hardwood forests were all chopped down from New England all the way down the coast, used for farming. And the last forests were in Michigan, and that's where they started building the railroad cars, because the railroads were expanding all over the country, and they had to build railroad cars to carry the freight. And that's where they were built. Now, Charles King invented the pneumatic tools, the air gun, and the rivet gun, powered by air. He built the very first car in Michigan. And Ransom Olds was in Lansing. He built a steam car, but not an internal combustion engine before. And he actually, at 13, 14 years old, he built this steam engine. He attached it to a boat, and he used to take people up the Lansing River on Friday and Saturday nights as a romantic cruise to make money. And our earliest pioneers were so talented in discovering stuff. And what I do is I actually go to the county that these car companies are located, and I go through their county history. I go to if they have a county museum, I go to their county museum, and I talk to the curators. I try to pump them for all the information I can. One of the most important automobile pioneers, some people think were the Duryers in Springfield, Mass. They weren't. I would say that Elwood Haynes out in Kokomo, Indiana, was maybe one of the most important pioneers we had. He had the Pioneer 1 built by brothers, Apperson brothers. They had Jonathan Maxwell working for him, and Maxwell ended up going to Oldsmobile and built the Maxwell car that ended up becoming Chrysler. The Apperson brothers separated from Haynes and built their car, the Apperson, the Jackrabbit. And incidentally, the Apperson brothers, the youngest one went hunting with his father, and he shot a rabbit the very first time at 5, 6 years old, and the father started yelling at him, and he couldn't understand why, and the father told him, if you're going to shoot a rabbit, you got to shoot him between the eyes, because now we can't eat it. It's filled with lead. Their grandfather was Daniel Boone on the maternal side. Now, Elwood Haynes worked in the gas industry. He invented stainless steel, sold it to U.S. Stainless Steel. He invented Stellite that became Union Carbide, and they used Stellite in the NASA building of our spaceships and everything. And this guy dates back to the 1800s. He went to Worcester Polytech Institute, and he learned metallurgy. And these are pioneers that fit in with that Eli Whitney and Thomas Blanchard and Samuel Slater, the evolution of our country by building and innovating, making things better, stronger. So,
yeah, it is really fascinating, and for people that also want a little bit of a touch for history, go out to the Longfellow Inn out in Sudbury. That was originally going to be like Greenfield Village. That was going to be
you're right.
Ford was going to be out there.
Yeah, that's the Wayside Inn is
Wayside Inn.
Yeah, and the grist mill Henry Ford restored.
Right.
That's exactly where he wanted to build that. But you brought up going out west. Springfield has the quad museums, and one of them is on transportation, and they have every Indian motorcycle ever built, at least one for every year. They have the Rolls-Royce Phantom 2 that was built there. They have other cars in that museum, the Transportation Museum. That's another great spot.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of great places to learn about automotive history, and it sounds like a good start would be learning from the books that you've written. And again, if people want to find out more information about your books, where can they find them?
Well, I haven't written any books. I've written articles that have been printed. Yes. Interestingly, I'm on Facebook, and anybody that wants to become a friend of Facebook, you're going to see more pictures of every single car built around the world. I scroll back and I look at them and I say, I can't even imagine all these cars. My name is David. but the middle name is Allen, Setterland, Setterland. They can go on Facebook and they can send me a friend request, and if they're into automobiles, automatically I accept them, and they can every single day. And not only that, I keep it so that anybody can take anything out of my Facebook by hitting the share button, and they can put it on their own.
Oh, good.
They could build their own museum of automobiles on their Facebook page.
Yeah. So have you before we go, have you gone to the Ford Heritage Vault?
No, I have not.
No. You should check that out. They have, I think there's 5,000 curated photographs and product brochures, everything from, you read the sort of owner's manual of owning a Model T, and you wonder how anyone ever actually drove one.
Well, it might surprise you, but I have over 4,000 books in my library, and at least 300, maybe 500 of them are all automotive related.
Yeah. Yep.
And on Henry Ford alone, I have probably 15 to 20 different books. I could spend 12 hours talking strictly on Henry Ford. But one thing I wanted to point out to you, Mr. John, the car expert or doctor, is Toyota got their start in 1936 assembling cars for General Motors. And once they learned the trade, then they started to take and build their own. And it's interesting, Toyota might not have survived if it wasn't for Bob Lutz, the engineer that worked for Chrysler, and he designed a Neon. And the Neon was a small, very good car, but it was very inexpensive. And what Toyota did, they did the same thing later for the Lexus. They took the Neon and they stripped it down to every last nut and bolt. They had all the mechanics in looking at it, studying it, and they said that the Neon saved so much money by making, maybe they have something that the Toyota would have 7 or 8 parts in. Well, Chrysler decided to make this with only 3 parts, so it was much cheaper to make that part. Instead of using 5 bolts to attach this, they only used 3 bolts. So Toyota got this idea, and that's what gave Toyota the initiative to take and start building a fairly decent car at a cheap rate.
Well, and I don't know how true it is, and I kind of half heard it from an authority who said that Bob Lutz fired an engineer at Chrysler once because they had a sign up in their office that said, we can build it good, cheap, or fast, pick 2 out of 3.
Well, it could be true.
It could be true. Hey, David, thanks again for joining us on the Car Doctor radio program. Maybe we can have you on again sometime. Maybe we can focus on one brand of car. We can maybe focus on just Chevys or Buicks or who knows.
That would be great if I just knew a little bit in advance, so I could have all my material.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Also, I think it would be interesting if any callers wanted to call and ask about a certain make of a car, about the Pioneer.
Yeah, no, and we kind of discovered each other because you were speaking at a senior, what was it, Council on Aging or something? And do you have any public speaking engagements coming up?
Yeah, I have April 15th at the Industrial Museum in Attleboro.
Oh, okay. That's a great little place, by the way.
Yeah, it is, and I'm going to be highlighting Frank Mossberg, which built electric cars in Attleboro. He built automobiles. He built the wrenches for the Model T Fords for Henry Ford. Ford wouldn't allow him to put Mossberg name on the wrenches, so he had to put Ford. But what he did is he used a diamond and he put an M in the middle for his trademark, so everybody knows it's a Mossberg wrench.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, he made over 250,000 bicycle bells in the 1880s that you attach to your handlebar and it rings ding-a-ling.
Amazing stuff. Hey, David, we got to get going. We got more show to do here. But thanks for joining us, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Take care, David. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye-bye.
Why don't we take another quick break? My name's John Paul. This is the Car Doctor program. We talked a lot about automotive history today. I want to thank David Setterland for joining us, and check out his Facebook page. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Kia Palisade. Hyundai Palisade. What am I saying? Hyundai Palisade when we come back. We'll talk about that when we come back. You're listening to the Car Doctor program on 95.9 WATD. We'll be right back.
No one wants to be left out in the cold. With AAA, you won't be. Their experienced technicians will be there fast to help with your dead battery, unexpected breakdown, frozen locks, or any car issue that comes with winter weather. They're trained to fix most problems on the spot, often without the need for a tow. And you're covered in any car you're driving or riding in, 24/7. Join AAA today at aaa.com/join.
South Shore hockey fans, please join us every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. for the Ted Donato Show, Ted Talks Hockey, on 95.9 WATD, sponsored by the Cask and Flagon.
Make an appointment Sunday morning at 11 for John Paul, the Car Doctor, on 95.9 WATD. Now, back to the Car Doctor.
And welcome back to the Car Doctor program. There was an amazing amount of information there. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be perfectly honest. When it comes to cars from the 1800s up to the 1940s or so, I don't have a lot of knowledge in that area. And when you talk to somebody like David who has that knowledge and does that research, pretty fascinating stuff. It is some of these cars that were, in some cases, barely car companies. They were really just people that started building cars in their, garages and horse barns and things like that, which makes it pretty interesting. One company who, maybe they did actually start building cars in horse barns was, Hyundai. And I remember I worked, as part of my job at AAA, I worked as a third-party vehicle arbitrator. So in other words, if someone had a problem with certain vehicles, Toyota, Hyundai, Subaru, Porsche, Lexus, I guess, and Ford were the companies that I worked. I don't want to say worked for, because I didn't work for those companies at all. I worked for a third party that did arbitration for those particular cars. And I remember when the first Hyundai came out, which was almost not really a Hyundai. It was more of a Mitsubishi than a Hyundai. It was mostly Mitsubishi parts branded as a Hyundai. Hyundai was originally a textile company that has since gone from textiles to building tankers to computer hardware to all kinds of stuff. But they also build vehicles, and the first vehicles, frankly, weren't that good. But that has changed a lot. The 2023 Hyundai Palisade is classified as a mid-size SUV. The Calligraphy is one snazzy mid-size SUV. It's a legitimate luxury mid-size SUV alternative. The Palisade comes in 5 trim levels, either front wheel or all-wheel drive. All models use the same 3.8-liter V6 engine that produces more than adequate 291 horsepower. Depending on the trim levels, you get everything from leather interior to really fancy leather interior too. It really is. The interior is a great place to spend some time. The seats are comfortable, offer plenty of head and leg room, have enough adjustments to accommodate, I think, just about any size driver. What's also nice to see, the passenger seat is also power adjustable for height as well as leg room. Somebody wrote to me the other day and they said their wife was fairly short, and every mid-size SUV they got into, the passenger seat was a manual adjusting seat, and at least in the Calligraphy version of this, it is a power adjustable seat, which is kind of nice. The controls are also nicely laid out. The shifter is a push button type arrangement, although not my favorite, but seemed more refined than the last Hyundai I drove. The info system is certainly one of the best, with actual knobs and buttons to control some of the major functions, minimizing driver distraction. The SE and SEL they can seat 8 passengers. Well, our tester, the Calligraphy model, had like 4 captain's chairs. I think they both work out well depending on what you need. Technology abounds with wireless charging, Bluetooth connectivity for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, even a wireless hotspot. There's plenty of 12-volt power point connections. On the road, the 3.8-liter V6 engine delivers balanced performance. The 295 horsepower engine is certainly more than adequate, and it still gets pretty good fuel economy. No one will confuse the Palisade with a sports sedan, but certainly more than enough power to get up to highway speeds with ease. EPA says 19 city, 25 miles per gallon. I average about 21 miles per gallon, mostly city driving. The ride's comfortable and certainly more designed for a family road trip than a twisty 2-lane highway. Overall, the Palisades is just a pleasure to drive. This is one of the most popular midsize SUVs right now, and it's easy to understand why. Full complement of advanced driver assistance systems like collision avoidance assist and navigation-based cruise control, remote start. Again, it's a smart technology vehicle without any doubt about that. It's a good car. It does have one interesting feature though. It has remote parking assist, which you push the start button to start the car, you hit the button and it will back up or go forward. So in other words, if you parked in a parking space and someone parked like 6 inches away from your driver's door, you can actually hit the start button, you can back the car out of the parking space. Seems a little bit more of a novelty than something you really use. I did it the other day somewhere, and it was at night, and the lights came on, and the car moved, and somebody came out. They got all panicky. They're like, "There's no one driving that car." And I said, "Well, there is, sort of, but anyway, kind of an interesting thing." If you want to see pictures of the Hyundai Palisade, go to my Car Doctor Instagram page, which is John F. Paul on Instagram. And I think we have a caller on the line from. Let's see. What's Jesse say? Jesse says we have Tammy from Duxbury on the line. Tammy, good morning and welcome to the Car Doctor program.
Yes. Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. I was just tuning in, and I was just wondering if I know back in about 2 or 3 years ago when the pandemic hit, there was a shortage of used cars. So I was just wondering, as of today forward, if there are any used cars available, for sale at all. Just only used cars. I'm looking.
Yeah, no, we are starting to see more used cars because we're starting to see more new cars, and that's where the used cars come from. Is people are going out to buy new. So, and that was sort of the problem. The problem was, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone thought that no one was going to buy anything. But in fact, that was just the opposite. A lot of people started buying cars, and a lot of people that maybe only had one car in the family because they lived in the city, all of a sudden, moved to their country house or whatever the case was, decided to, their kids needed a car. So it really shortened up and tightened up that used car market. We are starting to see more used cars come to market now, and we've also started to see, which is kind of a good thing, we've started to see used car prices come down a bit. Not a lot. In the last couple of weeks, I've had people on from both IC Cars and Car Gurus, and they both talked about how we've seen about an 11% reduction in used car prices. So inventory's gone up a little bit, used car prices have come down a little bit, so that's a good thing if you're out car shopping. And I think if you look around, and even at new car dealers as well, you'll start to see a little bit more inventory than there was, say, 12 or 16 months ago.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Tammy. Okay, bye-bye now.
Take care. Have a good day.
All right, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. And going back to the phones, let's talk to Bill from Medford. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, John Paul. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Quickly, John, this is about a 2016 Ford Escape that my daughter-in-law purchased new. It has about 75,000 miles on it. In the last year, it's been throwing a code for the EVAP system. Mm-hmm. The technicians have been able to get the code out, and it passes inspection fine. And I think they've already replaced something called a purge valve, or
yep.
To throw some code, a P1450 or something. But the thing I was calling for, John, she says of late there's this lag between her giving the car gas and the engine responding. And I was wondering if anything in that fuel system might be doing that related to that evap system.
No, unless all of a sudden the evap system went the other way and it's actually causing the engine to run a little bit too rich, but that's not usually the case. When the evap code comes up, it usually means the system's leaking, so like that purge valve or whatever the case is. So at this kind of mileage, you could be starting to see some carbon buildup in the valves. You could be starting to see some maybe some kind of tune-up related things starting to start up a little bit along the way. The other thing is this has not been, depending on which engine's in this has not been the most dependable of Ford vehicles ever built. And so right now I'd kind of keep an eye on it. If it's due for some sort of maintenance at this point, I guess I'd consider getting some maintenance done to it. Because it at this sort of time frame, I guess. You said it had how many miles on it?
About 76,000, 75, something right around there.
Yeah, so, at that kind of mileage, things like spark plugs don't need to be replaced, but on the other hand, I think spark plugs in that vehicle are around 100,000 miles. So even though it sounds like it's a little bit early, maybe the spark plugs will give you a clue of where it's running. So at 7 years old now, which 2016 sounds like a brand new car to me, but it's 7 years old. Yeah. Maybe it's time to think about a little bit more maintenance to the car and see how things are going as far as that goes. And one of the real common ones, and we're just about out of time, but one of the real common ones is we are starting to see a fair amount of carbon buildup in some cars today. So. Maybe try some Lucas fuel injector cleaner or Techron or something like that for a couple of tanks of fuel, and see if that maybe helps clean the engine up a little bit, and see if that hesitation between gears starts to go away. And now does it really feel like it's in between as it's shifting?
No, my daughter-in-law says it's as she's driving, and maybe it is because when they're accelerating from a light, it seems to not go.
Okay. I would start with a good fuel injector clean. Try that, and then kind of go from there and see how it is after that. Okay. Hey, we got to get going. That music means we are out of time. I want to thank our guest David Setterland for joining us on the program today. I want to thank our callers for joining us, and of course I want to thank Jesse for holding it all together at the studio today. Until next week, make sure you wear your seatbelt, drive safely, be good to your car, and if you see an emergency vehicle by the side of the road, slow down or move over. It saves lives. Talk to you all next week. Bye-bye.
WATD